Husserl and Heidegger and Sartre, oh my. Three weird, each in their own way, but definitely weird philosophers from the early 20th century. And diving into them is really going down the rabbit hole. Husserl was the father of phenomenology. He didn't invent the term, that actually goes back to Kant, but Husserl was the one that made phenomenology the heart of a philosophical system. Basically, what phenomenology means is that instead of trying to understand the essence of an object in a metaphysical sense like medieval philosophers did, or only look at the facts about an object such as what scientists would do and a lot of philosophers who are of a scientific bent, Husserl is simply saying that what we need to look at are the phenomena of an object. There's two reasons for this. One is that Husserl understood, as Locke had talked about, all we know and the only thing that we have access to are the impressions that we have of objects. We do not have access to the objects themselves. So Husserl is accepting that. That's true. We only have our own impressions of objects. And so that's one good reason to accept phenomenology. The second is that the phenomena in our mind tells us a lot about our minds themselves. What Husserl is really looking at is not so much the structure of the universe, which would be metaphysics, or what are objects like in the world, that would be more science. He is looking at the structures and essence of consciousness. Consciousness is what we deal with. We don't really deal with objects. See point 1 about why phenomenology is important. We deal with the phenomena in our consciousness. And so what Husserl says is that the first step of any meaningful philosophy is to stand back from what he calls the natural standpoint of just assuming that what is in our minds, what is in our consciousness, is necessarily a true representation of the objects in the world. So we bracket off all assumptions about what's actually in the world, what's actually going on. We definitely bracket off this assumption that we have that what I have in my mind is a true representation of the object in the world. And instead, we look only at the phenomena within my consciousness. That's the only thing that we are looking at. We suspend judgment about everything else, what's in our minds. This will bring us to a fuller, truer understanding of both ourselves and the world that we live in and all of the objects that are in the world that we live in. So, this is a huge, enormous, basic, foundational tactic, if you will, or strategy, I should say, of how to conduct philosophy. Well, we can't possibly talk about everything, and Husserl doesn't either, that can come from this strategy. And phenomenology, this as a basic strategy, can be applied to anything. It can be applied to sociology, it can be applied to politics, it can be applied to science, and it should be applied to all of those. But we can, when we do the phenomenological bracketing off of the world, come to certain obvious conclusions that are universal to all human consciousness and all human experience. The most important of which is that anything that is involved in consciousness, as in everything that we think of, there is this quality of intention. Consciousness must take an object. We, of course, think, oh, what are you thinking about? Not thinking about anything right now. You're always thinking about something. Consciousness always has a target. It takes an object, and therefore it has intentionality. There's a certain structure of consciousness that is, we are thinking about something. And what that leads us to, and this is a very important, probably the most important aspect of Husserl's phenomenology, is that means that when we are dealing with any human experience, we are dealing with three things. The first is the consciousness itself that is perceiving objects. So there's a mind there. Now, shades of Berkeley here in saying that nothing exists unless it is perceived, which means that shades of Descartes here, that means that there must be a perceiver, therefore that perceiver must exist. So yes, number one, there is a consciousness for whom there can be perceived objects. If there isn't a mind, if there isn't a consciousness that can have experiences, there are no experiences. The second thing is that there is the act of perception. You, as a consciousness, are perceiving. Now, we don't even know yet what we are perceiving, but perception is happening. If there's a consciousness, there's perception. And of course, that does also mean that there is a perceptual object. There is something that is being perceived. There is something that is affecting, if not directly causing, the perceptions, the conscious images and phenomena within the mind of consciousness. So, again, we have three things here. We have the mind, we have the perceiving act of the mind, and then there's an object that the mind is perceiving. All three of these must be taken into account. If you forget any of those, if you leave any of those out, you're not doing proper philosophy, you're not doing proper science, you're probably not doing proper anything. You're just wasting your time. Now, what that immediately forces us to accept is that there is a difference between what is independent of me and what my thought is of what is independent of me. So there's an object in the world. It's a tree. We don't deny that the tree exists, but we bracket off what the tree actually is and just look at our consciousness of that tree. We look at what is our consciousness of that tree. And our consciousness of that tree is what we have to deal with. And that consciousness of that tree that we have is different from that tree, which is independent of me. Again, Locke talked about this. Berkeley accepted this. Any sane person will just acknowledge that this is true. What I have in my mind is not necessarily the same as what's out there in the world. This is why when you ever have a conversation with someone and they see things differently from you, doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad, wrong, or stupid. It means, well, they have their own consciousness and phenomena about things, which is not necessarily the same as what's really true. So when someone misunderstands you, that's what's going on. What that means is that whenever you have an experience, that experience is constituted by your consciousness. Because remember, you are experiencing it, and your experience of it is separate from the object, and you are a consciousness that is perceiving that object, and your mind is structuring your perceptions of that object. Remember Kant. The categories of understanding in our minds are structuring our experiences. But Husserl takes this a step further and points out that it's not just that we have certain a priori structures within our mind that structure our experience. Our past experiences are structuring our current experiences. And that's how our consciousness is constituted by the phenomena. We know this because we learn things. And when we learn things, that changes our perception of future things that we experience. Husserl calls this the sedimentation of meanings that build up in our consciousness. Every time we have an experience, that adds to who we are as a consciousness. And layer by layer, these build up and we see through them. Now, one way of really understanding this is what happens when you've known someone for a long time and you thought, oh, this is a friend, I like this person, we get along really well, but then that friend betrays you. does something really nasty to you, you can't ever really look at them the same way again. You can't trust them in the same way. You can't even look at them in the same way. You can't even think about them in the same way, because your consciousness of this person has been constituted by your past experiences. The sedimentation of that time that your friend betrayed you is changing your opinion and how you perceive this person. Just like when we learn something, when we finally have that eureka moment, a problem that we just couldn't resolve, we couldn't understand it, and then suddenly it clicks, and now you see it differently. But that's the basic account, that what we must accept as human beings, much less philosophers, is that everyone who experiences things are experiencing things through the entirety of their past experiences, and of course their thoughts about their experiences. And so when we think about how people are perceiving things, we have to think in terms of who is doing that perceiving, and how does their past experience affect their perceptions of the now. Science has this myth, and yes, I mean that. Science has this myth that is completely objective, that it has an absolute depersonalized, objective account of the world. And Husserl really attacked this back in the 1920s and 1930s. He said, no, that is not true. Science is just another way of perceiving the world. Science pretends to give us an idealized and naively objectivized view of nature, but it's an artificially constructed world. It is constructed by consciousness, and the consciousness is not wrong, but there are human beings who are doing science. There are human beings who are doing philosophy. Remember, Nietzsche said that philosophy is always the unintentional autobiography of the philosopher. So this has really affected social science in particular, all the humanities. Science is, as always, a little bit resistant to ideas of this sort. But now you can talk very intelligently, and almost have to talk intelligently, about a phenomenology of sociology, of psychology, of political science, and philosophy of social science. All of these things are recognizing what Husserl points out, that consciousness is this ongoing, changing, malleable thing, and all of our perceptions follow suit with that. So enough about Husserl, even though we could go on and talk about him for 10 hours easily. Husserl had a student, and that student was Martin Heidegger. Now, you can't find much good material about Heidegger out on the web, especially in video format, because all the videos about Heidegger and almost all the articles about Heidegger either want to bemoan how weird and difficult he was, or talk about how he was a Nazi. Well, Heidegger wasn't really a Nazi, and he was only slightly weird, but he is very difficult. I know I talk about how this philosopher, that philosopher is difficult, and they all are. No one is more difficult than Heidegger. So let's really boil it down. The main thing to take from Heidegger is his concept that we are Dasein. Dasein, literally translated as being there. And typical of Heidegger's thought, it means that, and a whole mess of other concepts implied by it. That we are Dasein, in essence, means that we are beings in the world. That's what Dasein means. Being there, being in the world. Not separate from the world. We are beings for whom our being is a central concern for us. And this isn't just the idea of life and death. Heidegger talks perhaps a bit too much about that. Our being a central concern for us is not just about survival. It's also about the state of our being, our health, our happiness, our involvements in the world. As humans, we are also very concerned about the quality and meaning of our life. For Heidegger, it is not enough to merely live. We also want to live meaningfully. As Dasein, we are characterized as a set of possibilities. We are a being, a consciousness, who is embedded in the world. So it is not enough for us to simply survive. We wish to have a relationship or series of relations with our environment, our things in our environment, and even a relation with our life itself. So it is not enough to simply live. One must live meaningfully. And if this reminds you of Kierkegaard, good, you're paying attention, because that is where Heidegger got it from. But while Kierkegaard did a lot of fear and trembling about the meaning of life, Heidegger looked at it through the phenomenological approach that he learned from Husserl. So what Heidegger does in his eerily dispassionate looking at the meaning of a person's life is that you are a being in the world, and you are involved in the world, you are embedded in the world, and you are trying to make your way in the world. Now, what exactly that means is a matter of notorious argument among Heideggerian scholars. What Heidegger wants us to do, as he learned from Husserl, is step back from daily life and try to understand it in a kind of a bracketed sort of way, but also at the same time, we also need to be trying to understand how a simply detached point of view is never going to cut it, because everything that we have in terms of relations with the world are tempered by and structured by our involvements. Now, Husserl talked about how every one of our experiences is structured by our past experiences. Heidegger accepts that, but also adds this idea of involvements. Objects in the world, and he focuses on objects here, are matters of concern for us. We care about what happens, and concern is not, we love these things. No, we are concerned about them working for us. The example that I've always thought of in trying to understand this is a mouse for a computer. I know everyone uses touch screens now, but those old-fashioned computers that didn't exist when I was born, but we have a mouse, and you move the mouse, and the cursor moves on the screen, and you can do things because you can move the mouse cursor and click on the mouse cursor and things happen. We never think about what the mouse does until it doesn't work. It's transparent to us. We don't think about, I am clicking a mouse, I am moving the mouse is helping me do my work. Because the mouse just does what we want it to do. This is Husserl's intentionality of consciousness here. My intention is on the work that I'm doing. The mouse is just a tool. But when that tool ceases to function as I am wanting it to, it is no longer a matter of my desire, that's not doing what I want it to do, then it becomes a real object of problematic concern. The mouse doesn't work. And what happens with the first thing that we do, very human reaction, when the mouse doesn't work, is we look at the mouse, we pick up the mouse. And like, why isn't it working? As if somehow staring at it and going, why aren't you working, and swearing at it is somehow going to make it work. Well, if you are a human being, you have certain concerns. For example, if you are using a mouse on a computer, you are wanting to click on something. You're wanting to select something on the computer screen. And if everything is going according to plan, your intentions and your concerns are lined up, you're getting the results that you want. As soon as something interrupts that pattern, then you have a problem. And that's when you start to think of the world in a different way. So you are constantly thinking or not thinking about things, but you're always involved in the world, in this world in which you are embedded through your concerns about the world. Another aspect of Heidegger's thought that blends very well with this is what he calls the thrownness of our existence. We are beings who are thrown into the world. We're born. We didn't choose where we were born. We didn't choose when we were born. We didn't choose our parents. We didn't choose our siblings. We didn't choose the city that we grew up in. We were thrown into it. And because we are thrown into these choiceless realities of our life is a matter of constant tension. Now, this is where Heidegger probably goes a little over the deep end on, because when he tries to talk about authentic versus inauthentic existence, he gets into trouble real fast in trying to describe it, or maybe we're all just too stupid to understand Heidegger, as in like everyone on the planet. But what it means to be authentic, is it even possible to have an authentic existence? Now, our authentic existence is a concern to us, sure. We want to live a happy life, we want to live a pain-free life if nothing else. But what does it really mean to be authentic? How could we possibly be authentic when we're just thrown into the world? It's really confusing. And again, this is something we could go on and on and on about, and I don't want to belabor the point. But it is the case, Heidegger says, that in addition to our daily involvements of wanting mice and light switches and various other things to work as we want them to work, we also have to constantly think about our place in the world or who we are. Now, if you're not thinking of these things, that seems to be what he means by an inauthentic existence. And when we don't deal with this need to define who we are and the life that we're living and come to grips somehow with the fact that we are thrown into a world that we did not choose, we have anxiety, angst arises. Some of these truths that are the deepest truths in life are these kind of paradoxes where you cannot find the words to describe them. They are ineffable. Ancient gurus and scholars of religion really understand this concept. But what we can be sure of what Heidegger is saying is that when we do look at our consciousness as a Dasein, as a being in the world, then that opens up freedom to me. Now, we would love it if he actually explained what he means by freedom, really what he means by meaning, what he means by identity, what he means really about anything other than we are Dasein and we have anxiety. It's a big problem with language. Language fails us at this point. Shades of Wittgenstein here saying that, beyond our words, beyond our language, there is only the mystical. And Heidegger is into the mystical, which is why he's soundly rejected by analytical philosophy and reviled, truly reviled by some philosophers, because Heidegger is trying to get us to think about things that are beyond language. Now, how in the world any of this has to do with Nazism, no one can explain. It is true and an undeniable fact that Heidegger was, when Hitler came to power, slightly friendly to the Nazis. But then he mysteriously resigned his position from a major university and never spoke of it again. Does that mean he disavowed Nazism? Well, when he was asked about this in the 1950s, he said, no, I never disavowed it. Okay, does that mean you were a Nazi? But you weren't a Nazi. So why won't you disavow a Nazi? Because maybe Heidegger saw himself as being thrown into that world. He was thrown in Nazi, but he didn't choose it. He didn't choose to be a German. He didn't choose to be living in the 1930s. He didn't choose to be dealing with that situation. There's no sense in Heidegger of a warm and personal relationship with the world care or concern is never about love, it's never about family, it's never about community. There's some things in there about obedience to your society, obeying the law, and that's part of being authentic. And that's part of the big paradox and irony of Heidegger, is that there's nothing warm and personal about Heidegger's philosophy, even though his philosophy is perhaps the most personal of any philosophy, because it deals with that fundamental question of who are we? This consciousness that is embedded in the world, cannot escape the world, but in no way chooses that world. We are thrown into it and have to deal with it on a constant basis. And then there's Sartre. If Heidegger is cold, Sartre is frozen solid. I'm always tempted every term to completely skip Sartre. But some people find some things to like in Sartre, while others hate him. Life's a bitch and then you die is a flippant but not entirely inaccurate summary of Sartre's philosophy. He was also influenced by Kierkegaard, but with even more fear and trembling. Sartre, what I can say is this. Sartre agrees with Heidegger that we are thrown into the world. But Sartre rejects Heidegger's notion of Dasein, that we are a being in the world, because Sartre has this idea that not only is the universe empty, as in kind of a Nietzschean sense of there are no objective values, Sartre also oddly decides that not only do facts have no meaning in an objective sense, but that subjective consciousness has no meaning in a subjective sense. And what we are thrown into is not so much thrown into a world of facts and objects and other people. We are thrown into freedom. It's a necessary consequence of believing that there are no values and no structure and no meaning to life, that we have complete and total freedom. We can do whatever the frell we want. Well, that's good, yes, freedom. We all want freedom, right? Not Sartre. No. Freedom is a horrible thing. Freedom is a nasty thing. Freedom makes him nauseous. Those are his words, not mine. It's a horrible feeling of discomfort to know that you are free. And worse, to know that other people are free. That there are people walking around totally free to think about you whatever you want. Now, some will say I'm being unfair to Sartre here, and yet no one can deny that that's really what Sartre is saying. The presence of other human beings who are free consciousnesses means that you are living in their world and they can think about you and perceive you however they want to. There's nothing to do with you. Remember, I was talking about that just a few minutes ago about Husserl and misunderstandings. People misunderstand you. Well, for Sartre, this is horrible. And it all goes downhill from there. Now, if you want to read more about Sartre, go for it. I'm not going to talk about him no more. So what does this all mean? This phenomenology, this existentialism. Well, true to the core of what phenomenology and existentialism are all about, they mean that you are a consciousness and you have to accept that you are a being embedded in the world who is experiencing the world in the best way that you can. Look at how differently Kierkegaard and Sartre felt about very similar questions. Who am I? What does my life mean? What am I doing? These philosophers brought to the front that very question of meaning. What do we do to bring meanings to our lives? It is a question that we all must face, and perhaps there are as many different answers to that question as there are people.